By the time the woman at the front desk reached for her phone to call security, Osei was already watching her. Not with anger. Not with the kind of heat that rises in your chest when someone looks through you like your glass. She had moved past that a long time ago. What she felt now was something quieter, a kind of tired recognition. The way you feel when rain falls on the same cracked sidewalk you've been walking past for years. She stood in the lobby of the Meridian Grand with a carry-on bag she'd bought at a market in Accra 17 years ago and a jacket that had seen better days. She hadn't slept. She'd come straight from a red-eye out of Vancouver, and she hadn't bothered to change because the meeting wasn't until 11 and it was only 7:30. And she had assumed, foolishly, she thought now, that a hotel she had walked past 100 times in downtown Toronto would simply let her check in early without theater. The desk attendant had a name tag that said Trevor. He was young, and he had the particular kind of polished nervousness that comes from being trained to manage impressions rather than people. He'd looked at her once when she walked through the revolving door. Just once, and then he'd looked away. She'd waited. She was good at waiting. Then she'd stepped to the desk and said her name. Trevor had typed something, then stopped typing, then looked at the screen, and then at her, and then back at the screen in a way that managed to communicate, without a single word, that he did not believe what the screen was telling him. "This reservation," he said slowly, "is for a suite." "Yes," she said. He typed something else. "The Ashworth Suite." "Yes." He set his hands flat on the desk. Not a gesture of welcome, more like a man steadying himself against a current. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." She had not asked why. She had simply looked at him. He had reached for the phone. Her name was Osei Abena Bonsu. She went by Osei because her father had called her that since she was 3 years old when she'd walked into his shop on a Saturday morning in Kumasi, picked up a broom twice her height, and started sweeping without being asked. He'd looked at her for a long moment and said, "Osei, that one will go places." The name in Twi meant noble or great, depending on who you asked. She'd grown up with both meanings sitting in her chest like two stones she was still learning to carry without stumbling. She had come to Canada at 22 with Trungsul checked bag, a scholarship to Waterloo that she'd won on her third application, and enough cash to last her 4 months if she ate mostly rice. She'd lasted 6 months on that money because she'd found a part-time job transcribing legal documents on a laptop with a cracked screen she'd bought second-hand off Kijiji. She'd graduated with honors in computer science and started her first company out of a basement apartment in Kitchener with 2 people she'd met in a distributed systems seminar. That first company hadn't worked. The second one had. The third one had made her the kind of money that doesn't feel real until the day someone reads you a number and you sit very still for a few seconds. Not because you're happy, but because you're trying to remember the version of yourself who used to calculate whether she could afford bus fare and a meal on the same day. She was 41 now. She ran a technology infrastructure company called Ninkosua Systems with offices in Toronto, Montreal, and London, England. The Ashworth Suite at the Meridian Grand had been booked for her by her assistant because Osei had an investor dinner that evening at the hotel's private dining room, and it made no sense, logistically, to go home between meetings and come back. The suite cost $4,000 a night. She had paid for it herself. She did not own the hotel. She wanted to be precise about that, later, when people asked. She did not own it. She had simply once considered buying it. Trevor's phone call lasted about 90 seconds. He spoke quietly, turned slightly away from her, though not so far that she couldn't hear him asking someone named Diane whether the Ashworth Suite had some kind of corporate arrangement, because he had a guest at the desk and he wanted to verify the situation. Osei stood with her carry-on beside her. The lobby of the Meridian Grand was the kind of lobby that had been designed to make a certain type of person feel immediately at home, and a different type of person feel immediately like a mistake. Black, marble floors, a chandelier the size of a small car, low curved furniture upholstered in cream fabric that showed every shadow. A man in a gray suit, reading a newspaper on one of the curved sofas, didn't look up. A couple in resort wear near the elevator bank didn't look up either. The concierge across the lobby, a woman named Petra, though Osei didn't know that yet, glanced over once and then returned to her screen. Trevor hung up the phone. He typed something else. I'm going to need to see a piece of ID and the card used to make the reservation, he said. Osei opened her bag. She produced her passport and the card. She placed them both on the desk. Trevor looked at the passport. He looked at the card. He typed something. Then he said, still not meeting her eyes, I'm sorry, there's been a flag on this reservation. It's a system issue. I'm going to need to contact our reservations manager. It's 7:35 in the morning, Osei said. Yes. I've been traveling since midnight. I understand that, ma'am. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. She looked at him for a moment. He had the grace to look mildly uncomfortable, though not uncomfortable enough to do anything different. How long? She said. It shouldn't be more than 15-20 minutes. She took her passport and her card back. She walked to one of the curved cream sofas and sat down. She set her carry-on beside her. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not take out her phone. She simply sat and looked at the chandelier, which was genuinely beautiful, and thought about the things she always thought about when something like this happened. She thought about her father's shop. She thought about the texture of the broom handle in her small hands. She thought about the way her father had said her name. Not like a question, not like a prayer, but like a statement of fact that he had simply been waiting to confirm. She sat for 37 minutes. The reservations manager arrived, looking like someone who had been interrupted doing something more important. His name tag said Gareth Morrow, Guest Services. He had the wide, careful smile of a man who had taken a conflict resolution workshop and believed that it had worked. He sat down in the chair across from her without being invited to, which was a small thing and also not a small thing. Miss Bonsu, he said, I sincerely apologize for the delay. There was a discrepancy in our system and our team was trying to sort it out. What kind of discrepancy? Osei asked. A flag on the payment method. My card went through. It did, yes. But our system, your card machine, processed the payment 11 weeks ago when my assistant made the reservation. I have a confirmation number. Gareth's smile remained fixed. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. There's no issue with the payment. The flag was on the guest profile, a mismatch between the name on the corporate account and the name on your ID, which, my name is on both, Osei said. Osei Abena Bonsu. It is on my passport. It is on my card. It is on your confirmation email. It is on your screen. A silence. You are right, Gareth said, and his smile tightened at one corner in a way that was almost imperceptible. You are absolutely right. I don't have a satisfactory explanation for you. I can only apologize. I'm not looking for an apology, Osei said. I'd like to check in. He checked her in. He walked her to the elevator himself. He pressed the button for the 17th floor and told her that the suite had a view of the lake and that he'd have the kitchen send us a breakfast tray on the house. He spoke the whole way in the slightly too warm register of a man trying to reverse something he knew he couldn't reverse. At the elevator, he said, Again, Ms. Bonsu, we are very sorry. We hope the rest of your stay. Thank you, she said, and stepped inside. The doors closed. She stood in the elevator and looked at her reflection in the brushed steel panel. She looked tired. She was tired. Her jacket was a good jacket. Cashmere, charcoal gray, from a tailor on Spadina she'd been going to for 8 years. But it was wrinkled from the flight, and she hadn't fixed her hair since Ottawa. And she looked, she supposed, like someone who had been traveling since midnight on a red-eye, which she had. She thought about Gareth Morrow, Guest Services, and his workshop smile. She thought about Trevor and his careful sideways phone call. She thought about the couple in resort wear who had not looked up. The elevator reached the 17th floor. She thought about what she was going to do and what she was not going to do. And those were two very different lists. And she walked down the hall toward the suite, already knowing which one she would choose. The Ashworth suite was everything the confirmation email had promised. floor-to-ceiling windows facing south over the lake, which in November looked the color of pewter and was beautiful in the particular way that cold things are beautiful when you're warm. A king bed with a headboard that touched the ceiling. A desk with actual good lighting, which was rarer than people understood. A bathroom with a soaking tub and a shelf of products she would not use. She showered. She changed. She sat at the desk with coffee that she made herself from the machine in the suite, because the tray that came up from the kitchen 45 minutes later arrived after she was already on her first call. She had 4 calls before 10. 2 internal, 1 with a board member in London, 1 with a journalist at the Globe and Mail, who was writing a piece on infrastructure technology, and had asked again whether Osei would go on record about the proposed acquisition that everyone in the industry was already discussing in background. She said what she always said. She thanked the journalist for the call. She hung up. At 10:15, she opened her email. There were 43 unread messages. She read the ones that needed reading. She flagged 3. She deleted 17. She sent 2. At 10:50, she picked up her bag, went downstairs, and walked through the lobby without stopping at the front desk. Trevor was there. He looked up when she crossed the marble floor. She didn't look at him. Not out of coldness. She simply didn't need to. She went to her meeting. The meeting was across the street in a boardroom on the 32nd floor of a glass tower with a view of the exact same lake she'd been looking at all morning. There were 6 people at the table. She knew 4 of them. The 2 she didn't know were from a pension fund whose name she'd been hearing in conversations for 18 months. The meeting was about a potential investment, a significant one. Inkosua Systems was not looking for funding. They were past that. But the pension fund had approached them because they were interested in infrastructure exposure in the technology sector. And Osei's company was, by several measures, the most credible option in the Canadian market. She sat at the end of the table and listened to their opening position and asked the questions she had prepared and a few she hadn't. The 2 men from the pension fund were cordial and precise and spoke in the particular cadence of people who were very serious about money. At one point, one of them, a man named Callum, which is what his business card said, though he had introduced himself as Cal, said, "We've obviously done significant diligence on Inkosua. I'll be honest with you, Ms. Bonsu. I think what your team has built is extraordinary. The question for us is really about trajectory. Where do you see this in a decade?" Osei set down her pen. She thought for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to say it in a way that was true and not just polished. "I grew up without infrastructure," she said. "Not the digital kind, the literal kind. Roads, reliable power, systems you could count on, and I watched, my whole childhood, what happens to a community when the infrastructure is bad. People compensate. They find workarounds. They use more energy doing less. They lose time. They lose money. They lose options." She paused. "What we're building is the version of infrastructure that the next generation of companies, in Canada, in West Africa, in Southeast Asia, will run on. If we get it right, the trajectory isn't a line. It's a foundation." There was a quiet in the room after she said it. Cal wrote something on his notepad. The meeting ran 90 minutes. At the end, they shook hands, and one of the men she did know, a woman named Frances, who had been on Nkosua's advisory board for 3 years, caught her eye as they were gathering their things, and gave her a small nod that meant, "That went well." She went back to the hotel at 2:30. She had the investor dinner at 7, which meant she had time to rest. She crossed the lobby again. This time there was a different person at the front desk, a young woman with cropped natural hair and earrings like small moons, who looked up, welcome back with the ease of someone who meant it without performing it. Osei noticed that. Small things compound. She went upstairs. She lay down on the king bed with the gray lake in the window and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She never slept in the afternoons, even when she needed to. Instead, she lay still and let her mind move through the morning the way you move through a house, checking that the windows are closed before a storm. She thought about Trevor and Gareth Morrow. She thought about 37 minutes on a cream sofa, in a lobby designed to make a certain kind of person feel like a mistake. She thought about a version of herself who might have argued, who might have raised her voice, or cried, or called someone, or pulled out a business card and said, "Do you know who I am?" The way people sometimes expect you to, the way the story sometimes demands you perform your own credentials before anyone will believe you belong. She had never done that. Not once. Because she had learned, early and permanently, that the kind of person who makes you prove yourself before they'll treat you like a human being is not going to be fixed by proof. You can show them the card, you can show them the confirmation, you can show them the passport with your name on it in every language. And they will find another flag, another discrepancy, another system issue that needs resolving. What you can do, the only thing that has ever felt clean to her, is simply remember. Remember everything. Write it down later if you need to, and then decide, carefully and without rushing, what you are going to do with what you know. She called her assistant at 4 o'clock. Her assistant's name was Kwaku. Patient, precise, the kind of person who sends a confirmation before you've finished asking the question. "I need you to pull the contract for the Meridian Grand Partnership," she said. A pause. "The Technology Services Agreement." "Yes, give me 2 minutes." She waited. Nenkosua Systems had been in conversation with the Meridian Grand's parent company, a hospitality group called Halverson Price that owned 14 hotels across Canada, for 7 months. The conversation was about a contract to manage the hotel group's entire digital infrastructure, reservation systems, guest-facing apps, back-end data architecture. It was, by the numbers, a mid-sized contract for Nenkosua. Not transformational, but the Halverson Price name carried weight, and the deal had been moving toward signature in the way that deals do when both sides have already made up their minds and are simply completing the paperwork. Kwaku came back with the numbers. She listened. She asked 2 questions. She thanked him. She sat for a while after they hung up. She was not angry. She wanted to be precise about this. Internally, the way she was precise about everything else, she was not acting out of anger. Anger was a fog. It made you fast when you needed to be still, and it made you loud when you needed to be quiet. What she felt was something more like clarity, the clean, cold kind. The kind that comes when a thing you have always suspected is finally confirmed, and you no longer have to hold the question in your mind because you already know the answer. The investor dinner that evening was in the hotel's private dining room on the mezzanine level, a long room with low lighting and round tables, and the particular acoustic quality of a space designed to make conversations feel intimate even when it isn't. 12 people. 4 of them she'd known for years. The rest were newer. A mix of founders, investors, and 2 people from a federal economic development office who'd asked to be included and whom she'd agreed to accommodate. She was good at these dinners. She'd been doing them long enough to know that the first 20 minutes were throat-clearing and that the real conversations happened in the 3rd hour, when people had relaxed enough to say what they actually thought. She was midway through the 2nd course when a man across the table, an investor she'd met twice before, whose name was Brennan, and who had the particular confidence of someone who had never once been made to wait in a lobby, leaned forward slightly and said, "Osei, I heard a rumor that Halverson Price is close to signing with you. Is that true?" The table went slightly quieter in the way that dinner tables do when someone asks the question everyone was wondering. She smiled. "I'd say it's accurate that we've had a very productive conversation," she said. "I'll leave it there for tonight." There was laughter. The conversation moved on, but later, when the evening was winding down and people were putting on coats, one of the women from the federal office, a sharp, quiet woman named Sandrine, who had said very little all evening and noticed a great deal, came and stood beside her near the door and said, quietly, "That Halverson Price thing, is it actually happening?" Osei looked at her. "I'm going to make a decision tomorrow," she said. Which was true, and which Sandrine, to her credit, understood was a complete answer. She called her board member in London at 7 the next morning. Then she called her legal team. Then she called the business development director at Halverson Price, a man named Sutton, whom she'd been dealing with for the past 4 months, and who was, she had always thought, genuinely decent. The kind of person who was doing a reasonable job inside a structure that had some unreasonable habits. "Sutton," she said, "I need to tell you that we're withdrawing from the Halverson Price contract." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, we're withdrawing. We won't be moving forward." A longer pause. She could hear him processing. "Osei, can I ask what happened? We were days away from signature. I thought, I know. Is this about the terms? Because if there's something in the final draft that, it's not about the terms." Another pause. She could hear him deciding whether to push. He was smart enough not to. "Can I ask? Is this something we can come back from? Is there anything?" "I checked into this hotel yesterday morning," she said. "I was made to wait for 37 minutes on a sofa in the lobby, while your staff decided whether my reservation was real. I was not rude. I was not threatening. I gave them my passport and my card and my confirmation number. I simply did not look, to whoever was making the decision, like someone who belonged in your suite." Silence. "Osei, I want to be honest with you. I'm not calling because I want an apology. I don't expect an apology from Halverson Price to fix what happened to me in that lobby. But I will not spend the next 5 years building the infrastructure that runs your business while your staff is making decisions like that about people who look like me." She heard him exhale. "I understand," he said, and she believed him. "I know the business case was good," she said. "I know the contract was good. I know this is going to cause problems for your timeline, and I'm genuinely sorry for that, Sutton. This is not about the deal or about you. This is just what I need to do." "I hear you," he said. They were on the phone for another 5 minutes. Logistics, the formal notification her team would send, the timeline. He was professional throughout. She was grateful for that. After she hung up, she sent Kwaku the instruction to begin the withdrawal paperwork. Then she sat at the desk in the Ashworth suite with the gray lake in the window and her coffee going cold beside her, and she felt, not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, but the particular lightness that comes from acting in alignment with what you know to be true. By noon the next day, it was industry news. She hadn't meant it to be. She hadn't called anyone. She hadn't said a word to the journalist at the Globe and Mail, or to anyone else who covered the technology sector. But Halverson Price had 14 hotels, which meant a lot of people with a stake in the contract. And those people talked. And by the time the afternoon wire services were running, there were 3 separate outlets reporting that Encosua Systems had withdrawn from negotiations with the Halverson Price Group over what sources were describing as a guest experience incident at a company property. She didn't confirm or deny. She sent her communications lead a single line. "No comment for now. We'll say something when it's the right time." What surprised her, and she was honest enough to admit that she had not predicted this, was the speed of the public response. By 4 o'clock, the story had moved past the business press. By 6, it was in general news. By 8, it was on social media in a way that felt like water finding every crack at once. People she had never met were posting about it. Former hotel employees, customers, people who had their own stories, people who had been made to wait on sofas in lobbies, people who had been looked at once and then not again, people who had handed over their passports and their cards and their confirmation numbers and watched someone find another flag. She read some of the responses. Not all of them. She noticed the ones that asked, "But what about the people who don't have a contract to pull? What happens when it's someone who doesn't have leverage?" She thought about that question for a long time. She had a call the following morning with a journalist who was one of the few she trusted, a woman named Ogechi, who wrote for a national magazine and had been covering Black entrepreneurship in Canada for over a decade. They had spoken before, off the record, about other things. This was different. "I want to say something," Osei said. "On the record." "Okay," Ogechi said. The word was careful and unsurprised and exactly right. Osei said, I'm a 41-year-old woman who came to this country at 22 with nothing. I've built a company that employs over 300 people. I stay in nice hotels sometimes because I work hard and I can afford to. And I was still made to wait 37 minutes in a lobby while someone decided whether I was real. She paused. I'm not saying this to make myself the story. I'm saying it because I know that what happened to me happens to people every single day in this country who do not have a contract to withdraw, who do not have a platform, who do not have any kind of leverage at all, and they just have to absorb it and move on. And that is the thing that I cannot accept. Ogechi was quiet for a moment. What do you want people to take from this? Osei thought about it. I want the people who run hotels and restaurants and hospitals and hiring committees to understand that the thing they're doing when they make assumptions about who belongs, it has a cost. Not just a moral cost. An actual cost. A cost they can measure. Because eventually, the people they're underestimating are going to be in a position to make a different choice. And they will. She paused. And I want the people who've been made to wait on sofas in lobbies to know that it wasn't a system glitch. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. And it was wrong. And they are not the problem. The piece ran 3 days later. She didn't read it the morning it published, because she had an 8 o'clock call and a presentation at 10 and a lunch she'd rescheduled twice that she finally made it to. She read it on her phone in the back of a car, going north through the city. In the late afternoon, the November sky doing what the November sky does, going gray and then dark faster than you expect, and the lake somewhere behind her. She had not gone back to the Meridian Grand after checkout. She didn't plan to. What Halverson Price did next was not something she could control, and she was deliberate about not pretending otherwise. She didn't know whether Gareth Morrow would keep his job. She didn't know whether Trevor would. She had not asked for anyone to be fired. That wasn't the point, and she knew better than to pretend that it was. What she knew was simpler. She had waited 37 minutes on a cream sofa under a chandelier that was genuinely beautiful. She had felt the specific weight of being looked through, which is different from being looked at, and worse. She had checked into her suite and done her work and had her dinner and been exactly who she was the whole time, without performing it for anyone. And then she had made a decision, not in anger, in clarity. That was all. That was enough. Somewhere across the city, in an office with a view of the same gray lake, Sutton sat at his desk with a report that someone had prepared for him about the projected cost of the contract withdrawal. Not just the Nkosua deal, but the downstream effects, the press coverage, the conversations already starting with 3 other potential partners who had heard the story and were asking their own questions about Halverson Price Properties and their practices. He read the report. He read it twice. Then he picked up the phone and called the CEO, and what he said was, "We have a problem, and I don't mean the contract." The CEO listened. She asked 2 questions. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Get me Gareth Morrow." The conversation that followed was not short. Osei didn't know about that call. She didn't know about the internal review that Halverson Price quietly launched, or the new guest services audit they commissioned, or the training program they would eventually develop and roll out to all 14 properties over the following year. She didn't know that Trevor left the company 3 months later for reasons that were not, on paper, related to the incident, but were not unrelated either. She didn't know because she wasn't there for any of it, and she hadn't stayed in the story to find out. She had checked out at 11 on her second morning in the Ashworth suite. The lake silver and cold in the window, her bag packed, her carry-on in hand, the same one she'd bought in Accra 17 years ago, and she had taken the elevator down to the lobby and walked across the black marble floor and through the revolving door and out into the November air of downtown Toronto, which was cold and smelled like the lake and like diesel and like the particular version of a city that is always becoming something, even when you're not looking. She had walked to her next meeting. She had not looked back.